Never alone, and always under the Bureau's watchful eye, I felt like I was losing my sense of self. It didn't help that FBI agents are routinely polygraphed, both during the application process and while on the job, to determine whether they might be a threat to national security. I recall irrationally fearing that I would lose my job for, say, confessing to the deceptive polygrapher that I sometimes took a bathroom break without locking my computer, which is a potential security threat. To be sure, it is reasonable to think that such oversight is good, at least to a certain point. If the FBI puts too much trust in its agents, or doesn't know where and what agents are doing on their vacations, then perhaps they cannot be held accountable, a concept that is important in this book. So I am quite open to the idea that some facets of my personality were simply not a good fit for the FBI. I was nevertheless having a successful career, both operationally in the field through securing federal indictments in my investigations, as well as professionally through promotion to supervisory special agent. This brings me to a final, philosophical reason that contributed to my leaving the FBI, the reason that is relevant to this book. As everyone knows, FBI agents, like most law enforcement officers, routinely rely on tactics involving deception and dishonesty. Consider the use of confidential informants, or sources, whom agents and other law enforcement officers use to secretly gather information and evidence in support of investigations, or simply to gather intelligence to better understand a department's operating environment. I do not think that all use of informants is unjustified, though the practice is inherently dishonest and deceptive. For example, agents direct informants to conceal from others their relationship with the FBI, direct informants to participate in constructed, fake criminal schemes, and direct informants to secretly record encounters with those ensnared in the schemes. Of course, I cannot reveal anything about the informants with whom I dealt. Generally, though, it is worth noting how this sort of deception and dishonesty gave me another reason to question my career path. Suppose, hypothetically, I had an informant who was in a position to gather information or evidence about criminal or national security matters in another country. Suppose further that engaging in such operational activity would be dangerous. For example, if targets in the other country learned that the informant was an informant. Finally, suppose the informant desperately did not want to engage in such operational activity, including because the informant had regular domestic concerns regarding safety and family commitments, not unlike myself. Why would such a person agree to operate for law enforcement and intelligence agencies? There are many possible reasons. But one reason is that such agencies often have leverage over informants, such as evidence that the informant committed a crime. In exchange for gathering evidence, the officer or agent might agree to ask the prosecutor to consider reducing the informant's criminal exposure. In other words, a bargain is reached between the informant and the law enforcement officer, even if the bargain is steeped in deception and dishonesty. Did the informant have a real choice given the nature of the government's leverage? Was the government justified in subjecting the informant to the risk of harm in order to acquire evidence? The broader point is that one reason these situations troubled me was that I could identify with the informants I handled. That may sound odd, but even if our lives appear to have taken dramatically different paths, which wasn't always the case, I could typically see how I, or anyone, could end up in the informant's position had things been slightly different. I was especially uncomfortable with the institutional power, the power to compel one to engage in dangerous operations relying on deception and dishonesty. Law enforcement officers had over people who weren't much different from you and me, aside from a few chance twists and turns in life. So, that is a long, multi-part way of answering the question about why I left the FBI. I suppose that sort of answer isn't a surprise, given that I now work in a field known for verbosity. If this brief biographical sketch isn't